Alex White, maybe let's start off with that story in the Sunday Times. It's your own party which is asking the President, Mary McAleese, to send this criminal justice bill referred to actually the Supreme Court.
Yeah, well, I mean, the President has that power after a piece of legislation is passed in the Oireachtas to refer it under Article 26 of the Constitution to the Supreme Court to test its constitutionality. Now, I don't know whether the President will exercise that power or not. Certainly, it seems that there is a real question mark over the constitutionality of some elements of this new bill that's currently before the Dáil, will come to the Senate then shortly afterwards. One of the things, just in passing, I think that's worth making, others have made it, is the sheer speed at which this is being put through the Oireachtas is wrong. Because when you're talking in particular
about the amount of time, little amount of time that was given for
the amount of time that is given. But this is an important point, because very often the government says, "Oh, we're not guillotining debates and so on." It's not just about the number of hours that is given for debate. It's about the amount of time the public has for a piece of legislation like this to be absorbed and to allow it to breathe and allow people to debate it. Really, we're talking about a window of 2 weeks here. And remember, it's a piece of legislation that deals with the liberty of the citizen. And,
yes, but what about this, the other side of the coin, and we will be hearing from Steve Collins, Alex White, is that what about the liberties of the people who've been shot dead by these gangs? And that's one of the reasons given for pushing this through the Dáil very quickly.
Nobody, I take it, or very few people would say that there shouldn't be due process in our system. That's the first thing. So, of course, there are shocking atrocities that have to be addressed. But one of the problems I have with this bill is that although it gives the impression of taking a hard line and of achieving something in relation to those awful cases that you're talking about, it doesn't in fact do so, because many of the powers that the Minister is talking about introducing, they actually are contained already in legislation. The DPP can refer, for example, matters to the Special Criminal Court in any event.
Yes, I mean, one of the big issues, just for people who may not be as familiar about it, Alex, is that it will enable a system where people who've been charged with gangland-related crimes can actually be sent to the Special Criminal Court without juries. The reason behind it being in case juries or members of juries are intimidated.
That's the concern that's said to be behind this. But of course, the big concern and the experience that is there is that in some cases witnesses are in fact being intimidated. The concern hasn't in fact been, and hasn't been demonstrated, that members of juries have been intimidated. Now, I'm not saying that can never happen, that it doesn't happen. But the problem is there's a certain element of dishonesty in the way it's being presented, because of course there's a concern about witnesses being interfered with, for example, in some of those Limerick trials. That's a genuine public concern. But in fact, this bill doesn't do anything about that at all.
I think it's a really interesting story, and I think John Mooney should be congratulated on the story in the Sunday Times, because he actually does make the point that Alex made there, that the DPP already has this power to, refer cases to the Special Criminal Court. I think what we have here, though, and I think it's really important to focus on this, we have a big gap between civil liberties groups and people who are concerned about our structures, about our democracy, about protecting that democracy. And then we have people like Steve Collins, who's lost his son, Roy Collins. And there's a gap between those two voices, or those two groups, because I've heard Steve Collins coming out in support of this legislation. And I think it's very unfair in some ways to have of course he's entitled to say that. If I'd lost my son, I might be saying the very same things. But I think it's really important then that people who have the responsibility to protect our democracy, to protect our legislation, that their voices are heard in a calm, rational way, and that this isn't rushed through in 2 weeks, and that they're not accused of being unsympathetic to people who've lost their lives. I myself am deeply concerned of what's happening in our society at the moment. I live in Dublin, I live in Ringsend, and there have been people murdered there outside pubs. It's coming nearer and nearer to all of us, and a lot of people say, oh, you're not affected, and I appreciate there's certain areas in Limerick where people literally cannot go outside their doors. But will this make a change? And that's what we really have to have rational debate.
But you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't.
Well,
and
no,
I think
it's
all, the Minister for Justice is trying to enable better legislation to try to prevent this kind of crime happening in the country in the first place.
Why won't he take time? Why is he rushing it through? Like people like Charlie Flanagan, he's not a knee-jerk liberal. He's certainly, nor is Pat Rabbitte. These are people who know the law. Charlie Flanagan is a lawyer himself.
We'll have Charlie Flanagan on this actually
He's not. These people, and I have to applaud their courage, because it would be easy to take the populist line. Sometimes in situations like this, people do that, like the Dublin bombings, a lot of legislation was brought in that was very, very dangerous, and innocent people were convicted. And we have to look at, Birmingham 6.
But
we really have to stand back.
What is the major problem that people who are concerned about human rights issues or civil liberties have about this bill? Because it really is designed to target people who are involved in these gangs, and we have had a huge rise in
the fact that people can be questioned, though, that they can be questioned without lawyers in secrecy. When I heard that, just was a chill down my spine. I've worked in Latin America, I've worked in Africa, and when I heard that, I thought, oh goodness, like that's extraordinary. And will it stop gangland crime? That's the main question. I don't think it will.
Why don't you think it will?
Because these people will find all sorts of means. I don't know, Alex, I'm sure you would agree with this, but I'm not a lawyer either, so I haven't analysed the legislation. But anything that reeks of secrecy, that erodes our civil liberties, erodes our court system. I mean, we are very lucky. We have a wonderful court system. People may criticise lawyers for the money they earn and our judges, but we have a very, very important system here where all our rights are guaranteed, and any of us could end up being maybe a Birmingham 6 or somebody.
We have a judicial system that's believed to be soft on criminals, and that we've had too many people.
Karen, I think the legislation is there already.
I want to bring in Simon Harris now as well. Yes,
convictions are secured on a daily basis in the criminal courts. People are put to jail and sent to jail for lengthy periods of time, quite right too, for committing heinous offences. That happens in our system. People forget that.
And you're saying that criminals don't get off as easily as the perception is?
Well, certainly that is my view, that they don't get off as easily as the perception is. Yes, since you use those words, I do think that. But we have a system that's predicated, and that one of the fundamental elements of it is a jury system. We have jury trials in this country, which is an enormous protection that we have in our system, and they have it in other systems as well. And we should think twice about removing it. I think that's one way of putting it. We should think twice about removing it.
Simon Harris from Fine Gael, your own party is not necessarily against this. I mean, well, Charlie Flanagan has raised questions about it. Labour is very much against it. What are your own views about it?
Well, I, and indeed Fine Gael, support any measures that are going to assist the Gardaí and the government in tackling gangland crime and assist people like Steve Collins in getting justice for their son. And I think that goes across the political divide, in fairness to all political parties. We're extremely concerned at the speed with which the legislation is being rushed through the door, similar to the Labour Party. And I think Alex is quite correct. It's not just the amount of time given to a bill in the House. It's actually the government's attitude to the opposition's opinion. And the opposition, both the Labour Party, the Fine Gael Party, have been putting forward a number of amendments. And you'll read in the papers today that the Department of Justice is effectively dismissing these. So, it's making a farce of the legislative process. You also have a situation where a number of members of the Joint Oireachtas Committee on Justice have asked to look at a huge issue, which is the intimidation of jurors. This bill does absolutely nothing to protect jurors. And again, you'll see in the newspapers this morning, senior Gardaí expressing serious concern that as soon as a jury becomes appointed effectively, a guard cannot contact a member of the jury even to tell them their own life is in danger. So there are huge issues here.
But when you say it's not designed to protect jurors, the whole idea is that more of these people will be tried in the special criminal court where there won't be a jury.
Yes, but what about lower levels? We know that gangland crime now runs much deeper into Irish society. It runs much further than headline crimes and headline murders, which are heinous and all as they are. It's much more enrooted in Irish society. And what about the jurors? Not every trial is going to go to the special criminal court. And also a political point really worth making has to be the Green Party's position on this. The Green Party is a party that is opposed to the special criminal court. Kieran Cuff says in one of the papers again today that he basically has serious concerns over this, and that they've raised the questions with the Minister, but that the Minister doesn't intend to actually change much of the bill. Again, it comes back to what relevance have the Green Party, the relevancy of the Green Party's constituency got in government. Once again, they've said this is not a red alert issue for them. And I'd ask, and I think Fine Gael would ask, when do you get to a red alert issue for the Green Party?
OK, well, can I go back to Alex White? Because, Alex, you are a lawyer. So what do you think? What sort of a bill should we have to try and reduce the kind of gangland crime that we have seen increase dramatically over the last 10 years or so?
Frankly, I'm not sure that legislation and bills is what we actually need. We had a period when Michael McDowell was Minister for Justice when every day of the week there was another piece of legislation. If there's a gap in the law, of course there should be change, and of course there should be legislation, but it's very wrong for the impression to be given, and I think Dermot Ahern is doing this again in these couple of weeks. There's 4 or 5 pieces of legislation from his department within 2 weeks, none for ages and then 4 or 5. It's this sort of of macho principle that seems to come from ministers for justice these days, particularly the last 2 or 3 of them, that if you're seen to be legislating and seen to be doing things that look, quote, hardline, unquote, that you're achieving things. Now, of course, there's lots of other good work going on as well, but resourcing for the police, community policing, a lot of the problems that occurred in Limerick, it seems to me, over a period of time, had to do with the absence of proper resources. Now, they say that's been improved, but, improving detection rates, improving the kind of supports that the guards have, the sort of specialist supports that they have, all of those things bear fruit.